Stephen Ruderman here, and I am very, very happy to be joined by a longtime baseball writer. He's been with Forbes, he's been with Bloomberg. Right now, he's with Sportico. He's been with many others. Has so much experience.
Yeah, don't forget MLB.com. I was there for 17 years.
MLB.com too. Barry Bloom. And Barry, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you, Steve? Thanks for having me on.
Thank you very much for coming on. I greatly appreciate it. I wanted to have you on because we are 6 months away from the expiration of the CBA, the collective bargaining agreement. I know you are covering that in depth. What do you think of the whole current situation? And if you were a prognosticator, how do you think a lot of this will turn out?
I think the entire situation, it was complicated going into the coronavirus. I think the coronavirus made it much more so in the amount of money that Major League Baseball owners have lost and had to basically, borrow to make ends meet. You have 2 seasons, one of which a partial season was played with no local revenue, and you have a 162 game season now, which is being played with very limited local revenue, depending on where you are. So, I mean, look at the Toronto Blue Jays, for example. I mean, they've haven't played a game in Toronto since the 2019 season, and it doesn't look like they're going to get there anytime this season. And right now they're playing, at very limited capacity down in Dunedin, and they'll move to Buffalo in very limited capacity. The max that they're going to get up there is 12,000 if they can play at full capacity. So a team like that is just taking a bath. The players last year for 67% of their salary when the owners decided to play a 60-game schedule, and Rob Manfred implemented it. And there's a $500, billion-dollar or $1 million, grievance right now that the players have filed, trying to recoup some of that money, saying that the owners did not negotiate in good faith to play a longer season last year. So you have that all as the layer going into what was going to be difficult collective bargaining anyway. So, prognosticating this, I just don't see it being done by December 1st, which is when the 5-year agreement lapses. And if that is the case, then baseball will lock out the players. The players will not go on strike. First of all, there's no reason for them to go out on strike. They're not under. They don't get paid until they don't get paid out of season. Their contracts go from the start of the regular season to the end of the regular season. So once the season ends, playoff pool money is a different subject. You don't get paid again until April 1st or whatever the season is supposed to start again in 2022. And the owners are putting themselves into a position here where, after everything I just outlined in terms of limited revenue from the last 2 years, they're putting themselves into a position where they might not have baseball in 2022. I don't think there's too many fans that are going to feel too sorry for them under those circumstances.
Well, I mean, do you think there will be baseball in 2022?
From a pragmatic point of view, I think there has to be baseball in 2022. I mean, the owners could not. I mean, they're billionaires. They can do whatever they want to do. There are some franchise owners, like you look at Arizona, you look at Pittsburgh. They have ownership still with more limited resources than a lot of others. But a guy like Steve Cohen, who's worth $11 billion, he can float a lost season as long as he wants to float it. The Yankees, are on a different plane because, they operate on their revenue. And without a lot of revenue over the last year or two going into 2022, I don't see how they would be firmly in favor of no season in 2022 with another lost season of revenue. And keep in mind in all of this, the revenue that's even been, that's even in place at this point, a lot of it through 2022 is going to be make goods on tickets. If you basically, any major league team in any major league sport at this point, if you, because of no fans in the stands last year and limited fans this year, if you have a big season ticket base like you do in LA, San Francisco, and New York, those season tickets are have not that money has not been spent. That money has been given to you by the fans, and they're going to be credited to season tickets when their seats are fully available again. So that revenue is going to have been spent. It's going to have been paid to you in 2020, and then you're in a situation where in 2022 you're giving back revenue. You're making good on those tickets, so you're really not looking till 2023 at the earliest for any real fresh revenue. It's a real quandary. So from a pragmatic point of view, I don't see how the owners do this. I think you're going to have, you need 75% of the owners to do anything in baseball. And I can see that there'd be 7 or 8 owners that would hold out, that they won't have, a lockout. They'll lock out in the off season, but they're not going to lock out, when the regular season is ready to start. From the players' point of view, they want to get paid, so they're not going to strike. And so, you're in a situation where they're gonna play when they're dictated to play by the owners, who really hold the cards in all this.
You know, I don't think there has ever been a work stoppage upon the immediate conclusion of the CBA, and until 2016, I don't think there was even the threat of a work stoppage upon the immediate conclusion of the CBA.
Well, that's not true. I mean, what you're talking about is, I go back. When I've covered practically every work stoppage in Major League Baseball, going back to the 1981 strike. I think that was my first one. And, you had a situation there where, they had come to an agreement on every part of the CBA except for the funding and free agency, and that had lapsed. And so at a certain date, the players just went on strike and said, "We're not playing without a new contract." The contract had lapsed. And every other, work stoppage, if you go to the 1994 strike, I mean, those contracts were written so that the sport, the lapse of the contract would be in season. So you got to August or late July of 1994, the contract lapsed. There was no, situation where there was going to be a new one at that point, and so the players went out on strike. It's only at a point where they're not under any contract anymore, and they're in season, that it makes sense for them to strike. Yeah, they could have struck in 2002, which was the last big one of these, because that lapsed in July, and I was standing outside on the street. I spent the last 2 nights as they were shuttling back and forth trying to negotiate that deal, which they got finally done at the witching hour. In fact, I think the only reason that one got done, Don Fehr, who was the head of the Players Association at the time, he was ready for a strike. But the main players came in and finished it off, because it was a week before the anniversary of 9/11. It was August of 2002. So September 11th was coming. It was a week or 2 before that, and the players had no stomach to go out on strike again on the first anniversary of 9/11. And so subsequently, then all, work agreements they've moved the date back out of the season just to avoid these mid-season interruptions. You had a mid-season interruption that lasted 2 days in 1995. The other ones have been lockouts because it had lapsed. And so, without an agreement, the owners didn't want them even in camp. And in this case, you're not going to have a free agent market without a contract. So it's why you have this in the off season now and not during the regular season, because they learned from all those incidents leading up to the 2002 agreement.
So yeah, better to get it out of the way in the off season than have a deal in the season. Because what I meant was is that in '81 they played the first 2 months of that season without a deal, without a bargaining agreement in place. In '90, I believe the contract had expired 2 months before the owners locked out, and of course they had played the entire '94 season, and up until August 30th of 2002, they had played that entire season without a deal and without any contract in place. So that's why Manfred would lock out right away, just to make sure it's in the off season and that no baseball is lost.
Yeah, I mean, the other option would be to continue, as you said in the past, under the auspices of the current agreement. And my guess, talking to people from the Players Association, who I'm close with, they feel that there's not going to be any way that MLB is going to go into a free agent system, a free agent season next fall or next winter under the auspices of the current contract. So they will lock it out and freeze the entire market.
In 1981, the main issue was free agent compensation. In '94, the main issue was the owners wanted a salary cap. What do you view as the main issue or issues in this agreement?
Yeah, I think there's a multiplicity of issues in this agreement. I mean, I think you still have a handful of owners who want a salary cap and a floor and some certain amount of revenue, like the other sports that they know is going to be apportioned to the players on a regular basis, and that's never going to happen. And I think from the Players Association's point of view and from the players' point of view, they generally have talked about recasting of the entire compensation system, because younger players right now, unless you have the real anomaly of a Tatis, where the Padres bought him out of his free agency for $340 million. You have the guys who are the best young players in the game right now being paid the least amount of money, and so you get to a certain point in your career, and then Mike Trout played X amount of years in his career before he really got. It wasn't like he was starving, but the Angels didn't give him the big money until a couple of years ago. And now you have guys like Josh Riddick, who was just signed to a minor league deal by the Diamondbacks at 35 years old, who 5 years ago said he probably would have had a nice, comfortable contract coming out of free agency, and the owners don't want to pay him anymore. So I think they feel that this 1 to 6 year system where the owners have control, especially 0 for 3 going into arbitration, you have minimums. They adhere to the minimums. The best example of that is Ohtani, who got really the minimum the first couple of years. Of course, he got hurt, but they negotiated a deal this year to keep him out of arbitration. But he's still, for what he does, is being paid at the low end of the scale. So they're looking for, if analytics is telling you that it's not a smart bargain to sign, what I call second blush or third blush free agents, guys who are on the market for the second or third time at an above 30 age. But it's a great deal, to have players who are younger and have them from 20 to 30. Then they think that those players should be paid accordingly at that age and not have to wait, especially if the owners are refusing to pay a great class of free agents. I mean, I think there's something like 200 free agents who are out there this year, and some of them are going to play for Team USA in the Olympic qualifiers next week. I mean, it's a strange situation, and it really has to be adjusted. And I think that's their biggest argument. And then you go to, how do you, what's revenue? You have like gambling revenue, which is going to skyrocket. How is that going to be split? The players, are going to certainly want a piece of that, because you're betting on everything they do. You have the franchise value, which if Fred Wilpon buys the Mets for $300 million and sells it for two billion dollars, the players don't get any equity stake in that. How do you compensate for that? There's just a myriad number of issues. It's an arcane system that was put into place on the run in the 1970s. After the Messer-Smith decision, and Marvin Miller had to decide how to split up the pie for the players in the best way possible. And the 1 to 6 year free agency system to keep it limited was great for back then, but it's not great now. So they just really needed to redo the system.
Two big issues, I think, speaking of free agency, there's the service time. I think it's 6 years, and unfortunately, a lot of owners will wait a week into the season to call up the top prospects so they can get that 7th season. First question is, do you think they could get the free agency down to 3 or 4 years after a debut? And do you think tanking, which, let's be honest, that's really what it is, do you think tanking can and will be addressed, and that perhaps maybe we can see less teams go that route in the near future?
Well, I mean, as far as tanking is concerned, I think if we learned anything by COVID and the halt in development at the minor league system for the last year or so, I mean, basically we're just playing minor league games now for the first time in more than a year. I think you have to understand that this whole raison d'etre of trying to finish as badly as you possibly can to get a top draft pick is really irrelevant. First of all, 18% of all players who are drafted make the major leagues. 12% of them are there for any long period of time, and then maybe 2 or 3% have a real impact. So this whole idea that you don't want to pay players and you want to reserve your draft picks, even before this all happened, it was a bad idea. Now you're in a situation where it's been proven that you can't. There's no way going into the June draft. I don't know how they draft this year because there was no college baseball or high school baseball last year too. And they've eliminated 20 minor league teams. There's no rookie league ball anymore. So the development at the lower levels are not going to be there. They still have to figure out what they're going to do when they sign draft picks because there's no place to put them. And I think that the competitive balance and putting in some sort of system that would make it worth the while of a major league team to compete is certainly one of the things that's high on the list of Tony Clark and the players. How you do that and how you adjust service time. I mean, you can certainly, with service time, you can certainly knock out those rules that you can't send a minor league player, who has at a certain stat level, you can't send them to the minor leagues to start a season to basically slow up their service time. But how you go about those things, I think, are all mechanisms that they need to figure out and discuss. But the problem is, if you look at where we are, you have a 2-tier system in Major League Baseball at this point, where teams with money they want to compete, they want to draft, they want to build through the minor league system. It's a bi-level thing. You're doing both at the same time. It's kind of like where the Giants were under Sabian at the end of the Bonds era. They were trying to build around Bonds every year to make the playoffs, but at the same time, they used their draft picks wisely to build a pitching staff and a team that really sustained itself once Bonds was gone and won the World Series 3 times. And they're still feeling the benefit of that because even this year, with Farhan having been prescribed to come in and rebuild analytically, the Giants have had a success so far this season with a team on the field of older guys. The three guys left over from the World Series era, Longoria, a pitching staff that's pretty old and retread. It's interesting, and they're a team with money. So, yeah, how you basically incentivize teams to compete is interesting to me. I mean, I joke about it, and I have for years. I'd love European style soccer relegation for major league teams. If you don't want to compete and you finish in the bottom three, then you go to Triple A the next year and just go ahead, try and Baltimore. If you're going to sell a weekend series against Buffalo in Baltimore, that's what you want. Go ahead. I think if you had that, it would be enough of an incentive to keep major league teams from doing what they do. Of course, that's never going to happen, and it's the extreme. But you get the idea of where you need to go with this.
The reason I have a beef with this because, and I get it, teams are not going to have as much money. They might have a roster of either maybe not so talented prospects or veteran guys way past their primes. But at the same time, when you go into a season, everyone's tied. You have 30 teams tied 0-0. And I do feel like that all the teams should be making a legitimate effort every single year to try and win a World Series. The owner of the Rockies said in 2014, I found this very disturbing, that if we contend 2 out of every 6 years, and I'm not talking about win the World Series or make the playoffs, if we contend 2 out of every 6 years, that's a success. I mean, only 2/3 you're going to be cool finishing under 500 2/3 of the time. I find that insulting, especially with Colorado, which has a pretty large fan base, and I even think could be a big market team if they wanted to.
Well, I mean that's the mindset of the Moncriefs and their ownership there, and a lot of this is all top down. What you want to spend, how you want to build, what your ethos is, and you're not going to be able to dictate, even from a Major League Baseball level, how somebody wants to run their franchise. I mean, you go back to the day when the O'Malley's still owned the Dodgers, and their idea also was at the time, let's be competitive every year and win every once in a while. It's just we just want to keep our fans interested, and you want to keep the fan base coming out to the ballpark because they feel like you're investing in the team and they have a chance to win. Whether they do or not, all of that's a roll in the dice, especially as you have more intricate playoff systems and more teams that are involved. So I think the problem with a team like the Rockies is that it just means that if they're going to spend the money and try to compete every couple of years, and then those 4 years they're not even going to try, and that's a big difference. And again, it's where ownership is. Look at the Diamondbacks. I mean, the Diamondbacks have been fairly successful over the course of time with a very limited fan base and revenue system in Phoenix, of keeping a pretty competitive team on the field. They've won a World Series. They've been to the playoffs 5 or 6 times. And last year and this year, the COVID situation just killed them. It killed their decision-making process. It killed their minor league development. They're a team that works very well on minor league development. They've constantly, over the course of time, had good players coming up. They've drafted well. They have good players coming up through the system. They divest themselves of them usually when they get too expensive, and then they fill in with big free agent contracts like they did with Bumgarner. But really, they're thin. Teams are thin, and when they're thin, once you get injuries, you're just not going to be able to compete at the major league level. So your philosophy, whatever you attempt at the major league level, and how it filters down through your organization. If you have a philosophy of how you're going to do it, and that philosophy blows up in your face because of events that are beyond your control, then you're really in a lot of trouble.
But really, the Rockies drew 3 million back in 2018. But about my point about the 2 out of every 6 years, they've only had 5 winning seasons since 2001. 07 and 09, which they made the playoffs, 10, in which they went 83 and 79. They collapsed at the end of that year. 17 and 18, when they made the playoffs. I just find it utterly insulting, as I said, especially for a team that drew 3 million fans back in 2018. And do you think that a draft lottery is doable and could fix this?
No. Like I just said, I think the draft is a crapshoot, and I don't think especially in baseball. I mean, my favorite is that it took how many of the draft started in 1966. It took till like 2000. I'm probably off a year here, but 2016 it took for a number 1 draft pick to be immortalized in the Hall of Fame in Junior Griffey. And then the next year we put Chipper in, and he was the second one. So if you look at the top 10 in the major league draft year in and year out, it is littered with players that never saw the light of day. They were huge mistake picks, and and other picks like Mike Trout was the 23rd pick. So how does that affect your draft lottery? It's not basketball. Basketball, you can identify, who the top 5 or 10 impact players are coming out of college. Even in football, it's the same thing. So the lottery works in basketball, but I just don't think it works in baseball. And getting back to the Rockies, they and the Marlins were expanded in pretty much at the same time. Neither team has ever won the division. The Rockies have been to the World Series once and were swept by the Red Sox, and the Marlins won 2 World Series as a wild card team and totally tore apart the team that won under different ownership twice. They didn't have to do that. A lot of it is, if the fans in Colorado are happy with it, they'll still come out and go to the games. At some point, you vote with the ticket purchases, and when the message is given to the franchise that people are not going to spend money on you anymore, then you have to make an adjustment, and that's what the Rockies are going to have to do once they get to that point.
We're going to move on now to the Oakland A's. Do you think they are planning to move to Vegas, or do you think this is all a ploy to get the city of Oakland to come to the table and agree to their terms?
The Fishers own the team. Lou Wolf was a part owner with the Fishers. Cabell replaced him as club president. The Fishers have been the continuum since they bought the team, whatever it was, 10, 12 years ago. Okay. My belief, at having covered this pretty extensively, is that they have to start, and they know this. If Oakland does not want to do this, they're having to start at square one elsewhere to get a ballpark built and a city council involved. I look at this as, from a major league level, what they're doing is they're out there with an RFP to cities around the country to basically see who's going to pony up money for an expansion team somewhere down the road. I don't think the A's are ever leaving Oakland. And I also think that the deal that has been put on the table by the A's is something that the Oakland City Council cannot afford to turn down. I mean, you are talking about a $12 billion real estate project and a $1 billion ballpark that is going to be totally privately funded. What the A's have asked the city council to look at is $850 million of infrastructure improvements to an area that sorely needs it, whether the A's move there or not. And that part of Oakland, that's the only tourist district in the city of Oakland, down by Jack London Square. The rest of it, as you know, is morbid. You know, they're asking the city to look at it and fund it with tax usage, much like the Diamondbacks have just gotten permission from the state of Arizona to do. Is you can put surcharges on tickets, you can put surcharges on merchandise. It's a lot less specific in Oakland. It's like, let's build a ballpark district around this area and draw taxes out of that area that helps fund the improvements.
Speaking of ballpark villages, those have been a big thing. The Giants are building Mission Rock. The A's have proposed their project. The Cardinals have built a ballpark village. I think the Rockies just started construction on theirs. The Dodgers, and this is a thing that people don't want to hear, but I feel like the Dodgers have two options with the safety at Dodger Stadium. And when I was 13, my dad and I were followed to our car there. Okay, so it's, there are many problems at that stadium. And just a month ago, there was a big brawl outside the parking lot. I feel like the Dodgers are either going to have to build a community in that parking lot, or they're going to have to get a new stadium, because I just feel like the current location with a huge parking lot, which is right next door to a very bad area, I just don't think this can work out in the long term.
Well, I mean, the Dodgers have just spent $600 million upgrading Dodger Stadium. So I don't think that they're going to be spending money on building a new ballpark anytime soon. So I know they have all kinds of plans, and they have for years, to build around the ballpark. In fact, Peter O'Malley had plans to build an NFL stadium in one of the lower lots and move the NFL back there, and it never saw the light of day. The problem they have is just, it's not their land. It's owned, they lease it. Some of it is owned by Frank McCourt and controlled by Frank McCourt. He was smart enough when he came in. He wasn't the parking lot impresario for no reason at all for what he did in Boston, but he totally funded and paid for all his purchase of Dodgers and rebuilding the early phases of the rebuilding of Dodger Stadium, by taking money out of the parking lot and taking money out of the stadium in property taxes. So, I mean, I'm not that versed on how much the city council and the county of LA has control of that area on what you can build and what you can't. I'm sure there are restrictions and a long process that you have to go through with the government and many agencies to determine what you can build in that parking lot. If it was easy, somebody would have done it a long time ago. I mean, there've been plenty of smart people in there who've owned the Dodgers. And really, I do believe, these guys, Guggenheim, are certainly the best funded and probably the smartest. But people really diminish, because of how he was characterized. They, at their own risk, they diminish how much Frank McCourt moved that franchise forward out of the Fox and O'Malley ownerships to where it is today. So, yeah, I mean, there's separate problems you're talking about there, and policing Dodger Stadium parking lot, which they have a huge police presence there now. I've been there a lot this year. That it's really well patrolled. That is a completely different subject to, what do the Dodgers do for the long term? And there really isn't much land in downtown LA anymore for them to build.
Do you think, though, like a community, I'm talking condos, restaurants, office spaces, could be doable in that Dodger Stadium parking lot?
Oh, sure. I mean, like you said, I mean, you left out Atlanta, which was the ballpark was built at the core of a ballpark district. It all opened pretty much at the same time. That's the paradigm. Texas has built a ballpark district around and between their two stadiums at this point, and the football stadium is right there. Organically, San Francisco forgetting about what they're doing with Mission Rock over the next 6 or 7 years, but the organic growth around Petco Park and in San Diego and the ballpark in San Francisco, business-wise, has been tremendous. Anybody who remembers what was in those areas, prior to the ballpark, you take one look at it now and to what it is, it was back then. I mean, you totally redeveloped the area. Washington, D.C. is another good example of it. And that all happened organically because, the Lerners just bought up property all around the ballpark and just built like crazy. So sure, yeah, I think Dodger Stadium could wind up in the middle of a retail district, and you just build level garages to compensate for the loss of the parking. I mean, that's happening everywhere.
We'll shift to our final topic, Scottsdale, since this is Giants themed. This is a Giants themed show, and you have covered this. Renovations at Scottsdale Stadium. They've made some good renovations. I know there were 2 stages. There was the first stage prior to 2020 and the second stage, which was supposed to be for this year, but was delayed, my guess, due to COVID. The second stage where they extend the seating bowl, is that stage still on?
I don't know what the progress is on that. I don't know what the progress is on the Papago minor league complex at that point. I know there had been some city opposition to it because that's even though it's controlled by the city of Scottsdale, there's city of Phoenix implications to it. I just think a lot of this has been set back, and that but they have a contract that they signed with the city of Scottsdale to extend their lease, to 20, 30 years in that complex. So, I mean, at some point, the work that was promised to be done, that has to be done, or the city of Scottsdale is in default of their contract.
A lot of restaurants around the Scottsdale area, but a lot of them have closed. Don and Charlie's, Pink Pony, Italian Grotto. Gary really shut that place down at the right time. I mean, he shut it down in May of 2019, and if he would have waited a year, that wouldn't have been good for him. Do you think there are going to be any? Gary's a good friend of mine. I think you've been to the Grotto. You're familiar with it.
Yeah, of course.
Gary's a really good friend of mine, though. I think Gary does. I was hoping maybe Gary would consider opening a new location, but I think Gary did tell me when I was on the phone with him. I spoke with him on the phone about a few months after he closed down. He's just like, "Hey, you know what? I got to be honest with you. I enjoy sitting on the couch and eating potato chips." I think I do a good Gary. Do you think are there any restaurants there that you think could be kind of new hubs for people going down to spring training, and that could be long-time fixtures for years to come?
Well, it's hard to say because the last 2 years, it got cut short. Don and Charlie's and the Pony also closed pre-COVID. I mean, Don and Charlie's closed in April of 2019, I think it was, and Don had talked about a new Don and Charlie somewhere, whether it be in the Camelback corridor. I know he was looking around for a spot. He had a few places that he liked. They fell through. At 75 years old, too, like Gary, whether he's going to want to start up all over again at this point, I haven't talked to him in a long time, but I just don't see that happening. Look, there are myriad restaurants it's a great area. This area has, sure, certain places have closed, but a lot of them are either sustained or new ones have come in. This spring training, you really couldn't tell because there was still a lot of restrictions on where you could go, masks. The writers really weren't going out. I mean, you were still restricted going to the ballpark wearing a mask. You couldn't go on the field, couldn't go in the clubhouse. You still can't. So, It's only now that people are starting to prowl again, and there wasn't a real great influx of spring training tourists here this year either. So I'm sure as those evolved over the course of time into being spring training hubs, I'm sure that others will replace it. But I can't give you, one off the top of my head. I mean, there's a sports bar that's right down the street from where Charlie and Charlie's was on Camelback that's very good. And I could see that being a place where people flock to. It's not far from Scottsdale Stadium. There are good restaurants on the strip on Scottsdale Road. You know, yeah, a lot of them have gone over the course of the years. Just like some of them have gone around, AT&T or Oracle Park, whatever they're calling it now, too.
Barry, thank you so much for coming on. Greatly appreciate it. And we'll just see how everything plays out with Oakland, the CBA, and Scottsdale.
Okay, Steve, thanks for having me on. It was a lot of fun.